In this episode, we'll cover the idea of the New World Order as an anti-Jesus system, right? So we hear about, the antichrist, that whole idea, right? So everybody's familiar with that term. But what it really is at its core is the anti-Jesus system, because Jesus is the Christ. And so we'll get into what those things mean. And then it's a contrived system by the fallen sons of God that were placed over the nations at the Tower of Babel, and also the Hasatan. This is the Satan, or the adversary, who has the prosecutor role in the Old Testament to accuse the brethren before the Lord. And so it's a kind of like a combo meal between these two factions that are now joined together. And what are they going to do? They're going to erect a system that's going to overthrow this entire idea of the kingdom of God being implemented here on earth through God's, or Yahweh's, anointed king.
I guess before we start, let's do some house cleaning.
Yep.
And we'll get straight to the podcast.
Yep. So they're the God, King, Father, Friend podcast. And so a little overview about what that is, just a refresher. As our God, we owe him absolute worship. As our King, we're citizens of his kingdom. As our Father, he instructs us in righteousness. And as our friend, as it says in Proverbs, is a friend that sticks closer than a brother. Thanks, everybody, for all the feedback, all the likes, the subscribes, the shares. It means a lot. We really are trying to incorporate the feedback into, getting better at what we try to do here.
Yeah, we're trying some new formats too, showing the screen of the notes and everything too. So for some people, if we kind of lose our train of thought, maybe, it will help us to get back to it.
Yeah.
And also it will help some viewers to keep with the... keep track of the stuff we're talking about.
It helps me because there's so much material to go over, and there's so much stuff that I want to stick into these things that when you have flight of thought, we can mention one topic and go, for the next 30 minutes, and then next thing we know, we didn't stay on task.
Usually our conversations are not structured, right? So they just take a whole bunch of routes. So, but we're making an effort to keep it at least in one category. Let's keep it that way. Not even topic. We can do a topic.
Right. And so again, we deeply appreciate it. And so we're learning as we go. Be patient. We are incorporating feedback, and so there is no such thing as bad feedback. It's all, to us, constructive. And so with that being said, you can support us at theiconiclabel.com. We have hoodies, hats, and t-shirts, or on patreon.com/theiconicpodcast. And you can select your whatever level of support you want to do there.
And then, usually you get all the podcasts first there, so we'll try to do at least maybe 3 days to a week before all the other ones comes out on the podcast, then goes on YouTube and all the other platforms. Right,
for sure. And so the other platforms, as you mentioned, that we're on is YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Rumble, Parler, Truth Social, Getter, Telegram, Twitter, TikTok, Odyssey, Patreon, BitChute, and you can find those, most of them, on Linktree, who.b/iconic. And I think that's pretty much it.
That's pretty much it for the housekeeping. We still see people saying, you should be on Rumble, you should be here. We're everywhere. In the first one, the title was reframing, right? So we'll try to do here, like you said, there are all these words or phrases you hear, and different people have different ideas. Some may even think there's alien stuff mixed in there. There's a lot of things mixed into what people think and stuff like that. So we're going to try to bring it to at least some coherent level where you can understand what people back then understood these phrases at, right? Not what we think of it with the 21st century glasses on, but we're going to take it off, put the glasses from back then, and then understand what people understood back then.
Right, the 42 rule.
42 rule,
It's written for you, but not to you. Exactly. It's written to a different audience. You have to take yourself and place yourself in the audience of the ancient Israelite, because that was the original audience that this information was written to, right? So, and that has its own context. It has its own language. They have their own culture.
It's important to understand how they understood it, right?
Exactly, right. So, with that, so there's a lot of backgrounding in terms of biblical text stuff, and then because you kind of want to get into where do you get this idea of the Antichrist from in the first place? And then if you're in the New Testament, specifically in Revelation, where the Antichrist system is a big part of it, what are the antecedents to all of those ideas? And all of that stuff is found heavily within the Old Testament. So the New Testament is not doing anything different with this text. The New Testament is actually it's kind of like a flower that unfolds a lot of the ideas that were well understood in the Old Testament times. And so with that, we can get into some of the notes here. So we get this idea that the sons of God and the serpent in Genesis partner up to create a universal system that has a political and religious overtones. And these two powers are residing in one empire in effigy to the original divine rebel who rebelled against Yahweh, who's known as the Most High God, and his vice regent. So you're going to get this idea of the second Yahweh figure, who later in the New Testament you find out that the second Yahweh, or the second power, the angel of the Lord character, is Jesus Christ. He's Yahweh's anointed king. And so when you say antichrist, you're meaning Christ is the anointed. And so the anointed what? He's the anointed king. He's Yahweh's vice regent that rules on his behalf over the affairs of men. And not only that, we'll find out later that he's been given all authority in heaven and in earth. And so as we go through here, this Satan plays a blasphemous role as he pretends to be Yahweh. He pretends to be the guy that he assumes the role of the Most High. And this is why a lot of people would follow this idea of, like, if we look at what the elite are doing today in terms of the New World Order, they would say that they're Luciferian or that they're satanic. Yeah, those things are true, but we have to understand that Lucifer, or Satan, or this Hasatan character, the serpent, the devil, was never given authority over the nations. Only the sons of God were at the Tower of Babel. So the question becomes, at Jesus' his temptation, when Satan says, if you just bow down and worship me, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. Was this an empty promise, or did it have some teeth? And so later on, Satan is then identified as the god of this world. And so somehow he goes from just being this original divine rebel, having nothing to do with the nations, just this tempter that's in the Garden of Eden, or associated with the Garden of Eden. And then later he's going to pop up around Job, and he's going to be, hey, the only reason why Job is on your side, Yahweh, is because
you give him all this good stuff.
You treat him so well. If you take away all of these things, he'll curse you to your face, right? So, and then he's going to pop up in the New Testament, tempting Jesus, right? And then we find out that his final abode is the lake of fire, and with him and his angels, and they're destroyed there. And whoever goes their direction, goes with them, they also will be destroyed along with them. But now there's this interesting in-between piece. When did he actually get this authority?
Yeah, the street cred, right? Like we call it, yeah.
So he has the street cred because he's the original divine rebel, but when does he get the authority over the nations to make these type of conditions of these contractual conditions with Jesus? Hey, if you bow down and worship me, I'll give you all the nations of the world. When did that take place? And so as we go through here, we'll see that there's we have to lay the landscape first, right? So if it's a system that's being set up against Jesus, who is Yahweh's anointed, Yahweh's Christ, then we have to know who's on the good side and who's on the bad side, right? So if we go over the overview of the teams, we have the good side, the kingdom of light, and so Yahweh, Father, Son, and Spirit. The Divine Counsel, these are the loyal sons of God. So we have this idea of this Divine Counsel, and they're made up of the highest rank and file in the spiritual world, known as the sons of God. And these guys are all of them placed over the nations at Babel? No, there's only 70 nations mentioned there, so presumably 70 sons. And that has some other ancient Mesopotamian ties, the 70 sons of El, that type of idea. But and then you have this idea of the heavenly host. There's a whole bunch of beings that are there that aren't a part of the Divine Council. They're not Yahweh, but they're beings that are there. And what are their roles? What is their responsibility in this whole thing? And then you have human beings that are actually loyal to Yahweh. They follow his order. They uphold his order here down on the earth, and they follow his rule. They've submitted themselves unto the rule and the authority of Yahweh's Christ, his anointed king. And so that's the good side. What's the bad side? Well, the bad side, you have this idea of the kingdom of darkness. And in the kingdom of darkness, you have this guy, the Nachash, the original divine rebel, and it's a triple entendre. It's a brazen, luminous, serpentine being who imparts divine knowledge. He's trying to, as John Walton would say, he's really a chaos creature. He's trying to sow disorder in Yahweh's ordered world. And so we mentioned a couple of those themes last time with this idea of, like, Genesis chapter 1 is not telling you the story from non-existence to existence of physical objects. It's telling you a completely different story. It's assuming that the physical objects are already on the scene. And so what happens? Well, we get this idea that you already have the existence from, you already make this move from non-existence to existence, and things are still kind of in a chaotic world. And so now Yahweh's going to impose some order on all of this stuff. And so we're going to make this transition from chaos to
order.
Before that, to non-order to order. And then you get this idea that evil, this concept of evil, brings about disorder in Yahweh's ordered realm, right? So, and then you have the agents by which this non-order, this disorder is injected into this ordered realm, right? So, and with that is the idea that the only completely ordered space was sacred space, was Eden, where Yahweh's presence dwelled, and mankind was mediating knowledge and access of the true God to other mankind. So you get this idea that Adam and Eve are in a priestly role. That's what a priest does. And we're going to pick up that same motif later when you get Israel. Israel's supposed to be a priest,
the mediator to other nations, right?
There you go, right? And so now you pick that idea up later in the New Testament. Believers are supposed to be
the mediators
to those that are estranged family members of Yahweh, right? So these motifs are very important. They have major hooks, and it's all a part of this New World Order stuff. This is why everything's anti-Jesus, who is the Christ, right?
And then also the dwelling part too, right? So usually those are the places that God dwells too. So once you're converted fully, then like God is with you, right? You're the temple too.
Right. So that's the sacred space motif, right? So God orders sacred space in the beginning, and that's where He's dwelling with mankind. Mankind is driven from sacred space, and it's not until later on to where they're going to rebuild. They're going to have the tabernacle, right? And that's going to create sacred space for God to then dwell with Israel. Right? And then later you're going to get the temple where God is going to dwell with His people. And then later you get this idea that, well, now you are the temple of the living God, right? So now He will dwell, He will tabernacle within us, right? And so that's going to carry over to the very end, right? Where in the new heavens and the new earth, there's no longer a tabernacle. Because Yahweh Himself will be with us. He will be our God. We will be His people. And so these are major stronghold anchored ideas in the Old Testament. They have long histories and rich traditions.
So in other words, it's not that we have to build a tower for Him to come down into the temple that we built for Him. That's not how it works.
So, and if you look at the Tower of Babel, the idea was, after the flood period, now these people there's a common memory, because this flood motif is recorded through a bunch of different civilizations, and they record some, great epic of time, some golden age, before the flood, and then now they're trying to build something to get back what was lost. And so you get this idea of building a ziggurat. A ziggurat is a temple tower complex. It wasn't built to go up to the heavens. It has a step pyramid so that the deity, the God, would come down, and He would be bartered with at the base, which was the temple complex, right? And then obviously Yahweh doesn't want to be localized in that sense, and so and they were basically they had thrown off this whole idea of the Edenic order: be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it. And so you get this whole idea of like which is the stuff that we're going to kind of get into later, because all of this is the backgrounding, the reframing for why you even get a new world order in the first place. What is the whole point? What are the fallen sons of God partnered with the Nachash, the serpent guy, the Satan? What are they trying to do by doing this new world order thing? And the people that are on this side, in the earthly realm, so to speak, what do they think that they're going to gain by going along with this whole idea, right? So
it's the kind of borrowing from Cyvilan. They think it's being built for them, right? If they're not, don't be afraid to call them enemy here, because they will turn into enemies, right?
100%, right?
So I think where you were is like, so good side, bad side. We have the good side, and then the bad side is the lack of good, right? All the good taken out, pretty much.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have the cast of characters that are on the kingdom of darkness side, right? So the Nachash, who's the brazen, luminous, serpentine being who imparts divine knowledge, right? So to Eve. And then you have fallen humanity. Fallen humanity obviously would be represented in Adam and Eve. Once they're cast from sacred space, humanity no longer has access to knowledge and access to Yahweh. They no longer have access to the tree of life. And then, that whole, when you get the tabernacle, going from outside of the tabernacle into the Holy of Holies is going to be retelling of this story. That's what the whole idea of the tabernacle was supposed to do. And so to get back to the center, to get back to the Holy of Holies, or to get back to sacred space, you had this idea of the linen was set on the outside that marked off the sacred space. You had one entrance on the door, the gate. And so the first thing that you would see if you opened it would be the altar of sacrifice. Beyond that, you would see the laver. Beyond that, you would go into the tent, and on the tent on the right hand, you would have the showbread. In front of you would be the altar of incense. To your left would be the sevenfold candlesticks. And so once you understand what those things are, you go past, so there was a veil between that space and the Holy of Holies where the Ark of the Covenant was, where the priest would go in and would sprinkle the blood. And woven on those, or embroidered on that veil, was the two cherubim, representing the cherubim that were placed to guard the way to the tree of life when Adam and Eve were cast out. So what is that story entailing? Well, there's this idea of sacred space that was reestablished, and then Jesus is the door by which you enter in, and it's his sacrifice that provides the atonement for sins, and you wash it, the laver to be ceremonial clean, to be able to enter the presence of God. And on the right hand, there was the showbread. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Jesus is the Word of God, right? He's the bread of life. And then on your left hand, Jesus is the light of the world, right? No man lights a
candle and puts it under the table. Yeah.
Right, you put it on the table so it gives light to everyone in the room. Let your light therefore shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. And then you walk up to the altar of incense, making intercession via prayer. That's what the incense represented. And then you're going to pass this veil, and then there's the Holy of Holies, where the presence of God would dwell, where the blood is then sprinkled. And so now you have this idea that the mercy and the sacrifice are now balanced out, right, 20 cubits high. And so within the Ark of the Covenant, you had the law. That's what we broke in order to start this whole process, right? So not keeping the commands of God which is why we got cast out in the first place. And so, but that's that's not what we're going to talk about here. I mean, we can't. But
I mean, it's still like a little bit. It's just an overview, right? Because every single thing represents something else, so we can go a little bit deeper into
you can
every step.
Yeah. So even the fabric that they're using, why it's done the way that it's done, what it represents, and then the actual garments that the high priests or the priests are wearing, and then that's going to kind of tie us into when Jesus is before Caiaphas, and Caiaphas tears his high priestly gown that nullifies his priesthood. Jesus was anointed by John the Baptist when at his baptism as the new rightful high priest. So when Caiaphas tears his gown, Jesus is there as the Lamb of God to take away the sins of the world,
priest,
and also as the high priest. And now he's the rightful high priest to officiate the sacrifice. And so, I mean, that's a whole bunch of goodies that's like way later that we kind of get into. But for now, we had on the notes here more reframing, right? So you had, so we've already mentioned, the Nachash, the fallen humanity, the fallen watchers. This is an important piece. These are the sons of God and the daughters of men. And this is a Genesis 6:4, where the sons of God take upon the daughters of men, and they bore offspring unto them. And this whole idea that this is one of the reasons, or the precursor for the flood, and then the death of their offspring, which were known as the Nephilim. Those guys, that's going to be the precursor for demons or demonology. How you got the demons on the timeline? They're the unclean spirits from this unauthorized
They were never
mixture.
meant to be, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah. And so I have the quotes in here from Enoch. So, and I know, so I wouldn't say that Enoch should be a canonical book or anything like that. But, the New Testament writers, the Old Testament writers, they were well versed in all of Mesopotamian literature, and it shows up if you just do a simple comparison, right? So, and as we go through the next piece is the fallen watchers. The watchers are actually the fallen sons of God that were placed over the nation. So we've bypassed the flood. We're now at the Tower of Babel, and you get this idea that the watchers. The term watcher or fallen son of God are kind of synonymous, but we kind of reserve the other one for the sons of God and the daughters of men, and this new one is really the fall of the sons of God that are placed over the nations. And so, well, what do? There's this big kind of like they were placed over the nations at Babel as a judgment, and we'll get into what the two-prong aspect of that judgment was. But this is your basic cast of characters. So on the bad side, you're going to have the Nachash, the fallen humanity, the fallen watchers, demons, and the fallen sons of God. And so if we do more reframing, we said that the New World Order is an antichrist system, but it's really an anti-Jesus system. Why is that? Why is it considered an anti-Jesus system? Well, the obvious answer is because Jesus is the Christ, right? So in these notes we have, because Jesus is the Christ, the system is set up against Jesus, right? And so if you think about Hollywood and how you can get away with all these jokes about Christianity or jokes about Jesus, and then all the caricatures that are made,
the mockery right now,
the mockery, the ridicule, anything goes, but what Jesus says that we should do and how we should behave. And so you get this idea that this whole system is against him. And what we want to do is detail why is that. There's a reason why it's like that. And it makes perfect sense. If I'm on the other team and I've been doomed to die with no possibility for redemption, I'm going to try to prolong this whole concept of existence as long as I can. And if God has tied my destruction to these human beings and their willingness or non-willingness to accept his rule,
there's your target, right?
There you go. Yeah. So now we have the target, right? So clearly I'm gonna divert people from understanding the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus on purpose, because if they do understand, I'm going to lose my dominion if you're a fallen son of God. You're going to lose your dominion over your population. And then, well, if that happens, you get this idea of he's going to return, and then there's this final judgment thing of which I have no recourse. There's no, Jesus dies for the sins of the world, meaning the human population. So anybody who accepts him is now could be redeemed. And so now you get this idea of like, well, what about the fallen sons of God? Then is there any redemption for them? What about those who have followed the Hasatan? Or any no redemption from that side, right? So Gonzo.
Yeah. And before that too, so we also mentioned for when it comes to God, you have to think and act the right way, right?
Yeah.
For the other side, it doesn't matter if you think it. Right way, if you act the way they want you, that's good.
That's
if you think the way they want you, then you act the way they want you to, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So then without you knowing you're anti-Jesus too, like you said too, right? But you may go to church on Sunday. That could be part of that too. We'll get to all that stuff too, right? Yeah.
And so, if this is the case, because the whole thing is against Jesus, and Jesus is the Christ, you get this idea of like, well, what is who and what is Jesus, and what is the Christ? And so, the next piece here is Jesus is the second power, known as the visible Yahweh. And there's a whole bunch of titles, and there's two ideas that we need to put in play. One is a Christophany. Christophanies are appearance of the pre-incarnate Christ in the Old Testament. So you get these ideas, these foreshadowings of Jesus in the Old Testament that are blatant parallels, like the Word of God, right? So that type of thing. And then you have theophanies. Theophanies are just appearances of a divine being in the Old Testament. So Christophanies, Jesus; theophanies, gods or God. And so that being said, he is there's a whole bunch of titles here. He is the great I am. He's the Most High. He's the Son of the Most High. He's the Son of Man. He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the Alpha, the Omega, the first and the last, the captain of the Lord's host, the Lord of the council, the God of Bethel, the angel of the presence, the angel of the Lord, or the angel of Yahweh. He's the angel in whom Hashem dwells. Hashem is a term that just means the name, right? So there's this idea of the name theology in the Old Testament. This is the angel that Yahweh's name, it resides. And so he has the same authority. And there's a whole bunch of good stuff that's around that. He's the Savior, the Messiah, the Word of God. He's the one mediator between God and man. That's 1 Timothy 2:5. He's the Lord, Yahweh. He's God, Elohim, Almighty, or El Shaddai. And there's a whole bunch of other titles. But this guy, this Jesus character, is responsible for the creation of the heavens and the earth and the seas and everything that is within them. Colossians 1:16-20, speaking of Jesus, it says, "For by him all things were created, that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones, dominions, principalities, or powers. All things are created by him and for him, and he is before all things, and by him all things consist." Or if you go to John chapter 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And so he is the great I am. At Sinai, the law was given that we transgressed, Exodus 3:14. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus you will say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me unto you. Well, what's the New Testament parallel? Well, in the New Testament, Jesus was in a heated debate with those who opposed him, and they were talking about Abraham. He said, Abraham rejoiced to see his day and was glad. This is John 8:57 and 58. It says, and then the Jews said unto him, you are not even 50 years old, and you've seen Abraham? And Jesus said unto them, most assuredly I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. And so now, so this idea that Jesus is the visible Yahweh, he's the one interacting with mankind in the Old Testament. And so if that's the case, then what is a Christ? We know who the Jesus character is. He's the second power, the second Yahweh figure. He's the Word of God. He's all those things. And when Yahweh shows up, it's that guy, right? But what is a Christ then? So Christ comes from the Greek word Christos, which means the anointed one. And so the word is derived from the Greek meaning to anoint. Mm-hmm. And so in the Greek Septuagint, Christos is usually translated as Messiah. So you hear this Messiah term getting thrown around, meaning the one who is anointed. And so, okay, so now we know who the Jesus guy is, and we know what a Christ is. So in this New World Order thing, though, who's on Yahweh's team and who's on the other side? And why is there beef between the two? I mean, can't we all just get along?
Just coexist.
Yeah. And so now we can get a little bit more into the detail of we've gave you an overview of that before, so now let's kind of get a little deeper into the subject. So Yahweh, Father, Son, and Spirit, you have one God revealed as three persons. This is the Jewish binitarianism in the Old Testament. Alan Siegel's book, The Two Powers Doctrine, they identified that there was a two Yahweh figure, both good guys. They would show up in a lot of scenes together, and it was perplexing. And then you get this admission, we have Jewish binitarianism, right? So, but then after the first century, you have the Christians running around saying, hey guys, we know who this second Yahweh figure is. It's Jesus of Nazareth. And then it's declared a heresy. And so now you get this idea that, well, if that's the case, then Yahweh is the creator of the heavens, the earth, and the seas, and all that is within them. That's going to tie into the fourth commandment, right? Mm-hmm. So remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. For in 6 days, I, the Lord your God, creator of the heavens and the earth, that's his name, his title, and his territory, mm-hmm. and which symbolizes his authority, right?
So we'll talk to when it comes to like you said, the mark, right? What the mark is,
right? Yeah. So that ties directly into what the mark is, mm-hmm. right? So, and so the next piece is the Divine Counsel. These are the loyal members of the sons of God who kind of stayed loyal with Yahweh. So the Divine Counsel is made up of the loyal sons of God who are Yahweh's divine bureaucracy. So he's going to administer creation through his counsel, not because he needs an advice, because he's an all-knowing being, because he likes to do that, because that's his thing, right? So you get this idea that not only is he administering the divine realm through these guys, there's some things that are spilling over to the earthly realm, even though mankind has been given dominion. And this is a natural progression from, mankind was originally given dominion, and then he's going to divorce that idea, put the sons of God over the nations, work specifically with Israel to produce this Messiah thing. And we'll see how it all plays out, because that's the back burner for why you even have a New World Order in the first place. There's some hostilities mm-hmm. left over from these decisions that are made. And so as we go through, again, the Divine Counsel is made up of the loyal sons of God who are Yahweh's divine bureaucracy in which he administers creation through, both in the spiritual and the earthly realm. The sons of God title is the highest ranking term in the spiritual world that a created being can have. All of these beings are created beings. They're all contingent upon Yahweh for their existence. None of them are competing with him in terms of attributes. He's all-knowing, he's mm-hmm. all-powerful, he's omnibenevolent, he's all those things. And they are just created beings that have been given some authority. They also image him. The mm-hmm. imaging language that's used of us in Genesis 1:26, let us make mankind after our image, after our own likeness. That's also used of them. They also image him in the divine realm. Mm-hmm. And so this is going to get us way later when we talk about why is he doing all of this in the first place, this conjoining together of his two families, the heavenly realm and the
physical,
earth. Yeah. And so over there's disembodied spirit beings. Over here you have embodied spirit beings, and the nexus place that was the beginning of that was Eden. Eden was the nexus point where those two realms were combined. And so as we go through here, terms that are used for these sons of God guys, they're in the assembly, they're in the council, they're in the congregation, they're in the assembled meeting, they're in the court, they're considered watchers or sons of God or holy ones. And so what do members of this divine council thing, what do they actually do? And so you get, they contribute to council resolutions. They're bearing witness and oversee God's decrees. They assist in God's governance of the human world. They explain divine activity. They execute divine judgment. You go, that's nice, but are there any examples of this anywhere? Well, when we look at, Daniel 4:17, the watchers, this is divine council language is used about the judgment of King Nebuchadnezzar. And so this is Daniel 4, and so it says, I saw in the night visions in my head as I lay on my bed, and behold, a watcher, that's a divine council member, a holy one came down from heaven. He proclaimed with a loud voice. And so now you get this judgment that's pronounced against King Nebuchadnezzar. And then verse 17, the sentence is by decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men. Okay, so these guys are making decisions, and these decisions are being co-signed by Yahweh, right? So, and so now you can see this, how the divine bureaucracy is being carried out. And so, speaking generically, when we refer to these beings that are over there in the spirit world, we hear terms like, the heavenly host, right? So again, kind of like a scaled down version of all this stuff, people would say like, there's God, then there's angels, and there's the demons, and then demons are fallen angels somehow, then there's the Satan character. But it's far more elaborate than that. So you have, so speaking generically about the loyal heavenly beings, in the spirit world, you get terms like heavenly hosts, and they're called, they're spirits, they're heavenly ones, they're stars, they're gods, they're divine beings. And the question is, okay, if they're not sons of God characters, then what do? Well, they're angels, they're malaks, right? They're messengers, they're ministers, they're hosts, or mighty ones. These are like military, or they're militant roles. And then cherubim and seraphim, these are guardianship, they guard the presence of God. And so what's the last piece? Well, the last piece are God's earthly imagers. If they're on the good team and they want to be on Yahweh's side, then they're earthly imagers, any people in humankind that upholds Yahweh's order, keeps his commands, and is subject to the rule of his son, Jesus, right? Because the rulership of his son is a big deal, and those that identify with Yahweh is we'll see later, that relationship has been siloed. First, it was siloed to Israel, right? So, and then it gets siloed even further to the son, right? And so, if that's the case, then who's on the bad team? Let's deep dive into the bad team. We can spend a week on this stuff, but a little deeper than we went before. So. The Nachash, the original divine rebel, the shining brazen serpentine being who imparts divine knowledge to Eve. He's considered the original divine rebel. He's the first one recorded in the text that does this rebellion thing. And then you get this idea of fallen humankind. So Adam is a word that just means human. Adam's personal name is not Adam. Even though we use it as a personal name, it really literally means mankind. And mankind was created male and female. And so it's male and female mankind that reject Yahweh's rule, his order, or his king, Jesus. And so then you have the fallen watchers. This is the transgression of the heavens and the earth, Genesis 6:4, in which we get the demons. And so disembodied dead Nephilim that are the children of the sons of God and the daughters of men. The Nephilim that died either in the flood or in the conquest narratives under Joshua or Moses and later Joshua, their spirits seek re-embodiment. And so now this is going to get us into Mark chapter 5, where you get this encounter with Jesus and the demon-possessed, right? So they landed in the coast of the Gadarenes, and he came out of the boat. Immediately there met him from one of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. And so we mentioned last time that term unclean, lurking behind that term is this idea of like forbidden mixtures. And so this is hooking us back to, this is a disembodied descendant of the sons of God and the daughters of man. It Genesis 6:4. And so to continue the story, verse 3 says, who had been dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, not even with chains, because he had this idea that he has this like supernatural strength, because he had but often been bound with the fetters and the chains, and the chains had been rent asunder, and the fetters had been broken into pieces, nor could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar, he ran and worshipped him. This is interesting, because to this point, has anybody worshipped Jesus? And so it's going to be interesting, because those that are on the bad team, when Jesus shows up,
they know who he is.
They know exactly who it is, and it's going to be reflected in the language. And so he cried with a loud voice and says, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, you Son of the Most High God?" Right. So. And now we have to ask the question, in what sense is this guy calling? Are you just one of the guys that are placed over the nations? Are you that rank, or is there something different about you?
There's something different about
There's something different. So the terms that are going to be used, like especially of Jesus, especially when you look at John 3:16. So God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. The term there is monogenes, and that means unique, one of a kind. There's nobody like this guy. And so you get this idea that he's called the Son of God. The Son of Man title is actually a higher title when applied to Jesus. And we'll see why later, because that's going to come from Daniel 7. He's the one that's given an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion will never end. It's eternal. And so now you go, for he said unto him, come out of him, or come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And Jesus asked him, what is your name? And he answered, saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. Now, a legion, if you look it up, that's 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers. And so you think, well, at this flood, how many of these Watcher guys or their descendants were wiped out during the flood? And then under the conquest narratives, how many of these giant clan tribes were there that were wiped out? And how many of these disembodied spirits are there lurking around that seek re-embodiment? And so we can get into the demon stuff here. So the demons are the disembodied spirits of the sons of God and the daughters of man, or the fallen watchers and the women. And so the offspring are called the Nephilim, or it's a term that means giants. When one of the offspring are killed, they're called unclean spirits or evil spirits. The backstory is in Genesis 6:4, and the backstory to that backstory is in 1 Enoch. And so Genesis 6:4 we have here, it says, and it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took for themselves wives of all that they chose. And so skip down to verse 4. It says, there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The same became the mighty men of old, the men of renown. And so God saw the wickedness of man that was great upon the earth, and every imagining of his thoughts of his heart were only evil continuously. You go, well, what is this transgression that's happening here? Why is this such a big deal? Because Jesus is going to make mention of it in Matthew 24, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be when I return. And so
that's kind of like the second fall of the man, right? So now you have a different way of bearing fruit, or not fruit, like bearing the seed of the now the fallen angels, right?
Right. So we'll get into it here. But so we're going to cover like the four falls. They're known as the four falls, right? So the first fall is the rebellion of the serpent. The second one is the fall of Adam. The third is going to be these guys here, the sons of God and the daughters of man. The fourth is going to be the sons of God that are placed over the nations at Babel. And so here's the section on first Enoch section 2, chapter 6. It talks about the 200 watchers, the transgression of the heavens and the earth, right? So it's chapter 6. And it came to pass after the children of men had increased in those days, this is sounding very familiar, beautiful and comely daughters were born unto them, and the angels, the sons of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said one to another, behold, we will choose for ourselves wives from among the children of men, and we will beget for ourselves children. And so now we start getting to the actual characters. And Simjaza, who was their leader, said to them, I fear that perhaps you will not be willing to do this deed, and I alone will suffer this great sin, right? And then they all answered and said to him, we will all swear an oath and bind ourselves mutually by a curse, that we will not give up this plan, and we'll plan this, but we'll make this plan a deed. And so now
premeditation, that's all I see. When the judgment comes, there's no so I mean we kind of cut it off, but there's this long
kind of like a dissertation on what happens to these guys specifically. And then this has ramifications for what happens later in Genesis, or actually in Revelation, where there's this idea that perhaps these guys are going to be released from their prison to do some things here on the earth. But that's way later to get into, right? So, but as we go through, this is verse 5 for Enoch. Then they all swore together and bound themselves mutually by a curse, and together there were about 200. And then they descended on Ardis, which this is an interesting piece here, which is the summit of Mount Hermon. Now we have the connection with Mount Hermon, and then later in Jesus' ministry where he goes. Right. And they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn on it, and they bound themselves mutually by a curse. And these are the names of the leaders. You get Semjaza, then some very hard names to pronounce. And then verse 8, then the leaders were about 200 angels, and all the others were with them.
Mm-hmm. Can you just go up a little bit, the hard names, just so the audience can see? Yeah, if anybody wants
Semjaza, I'm not familiar. Akabel, Tamiel, Romiel, Danel, Azakel. There's a whole bunch of these that I can't pronounce really. But run it through any translator. It'll do the pronunciation for you. And so let me go back down here. We get to the next piece of it. So again, these are the leaders of the 200 angels, and the others all with them. And so now, not only did they mix, but then they proceeded to practice divination. This is 1 Enoch section 2, chapter 7, where it says, chapter 7, and they took unto themselves wives, and each of them chose for himself one, and they began to go unto them, and they mixed with them, and taught them charms and conjurations, and made them acquainted with the cutting of roots and woods. And they became pregnant and brought forth great giants, whose stature was about 3,000 ells. Chapter 8, and Azazel taught men this whole idea of swords and knives and shields and coats of mail.
So the war stuff, right?
So you're going to get to weapons of warfare. Mm-hmm. And then there's some other stuff, and taught them to see what was behind them in the works of art, bracelets and ornaments, and the use of rogue. And so it's a red powder or a cream that's used in cosmetic or coloring the cheeks or the lips red.
So you have the makeup, the lust, and all that stuff.
Yeah, cosmetology, and the beautifying of the eyebrows, and right. So, and then it says, and there was great wickedness and much fornication. Right. So what do we see today? We have the same thing. Right? If you look at on the platform that we're on, all these different social media platforms, it's all about this idea of fornication. That's a huge piece of it, and
with each time it just gets like the age group gets younger and younger too, which is very concerning,
and further out there, right? So a lot of this history repeats itself. So, and then you get this idea that they're doing the same thing. They're conjurers and root cutters. They're loose. What is this idea of you have astrology? They're telling the signs. They teach the course of the sun, the moon, and the stars. And so basically, if we were to summarize the list, they do weapons of warfare, drugs, cosmetology, conjuring, spirits, and astrology. It's kind of like a scaled down list. And there's more stuff I didn't include in here. And then this forbidden knowledge aspect is then aiding mankind in his self-destructive behaviors. And we have a side note. So the Watcher story has a parallel story with stuff that we're going to get into in civilian mystery religion aspect, where you have the Sumerian and Babylonian stories of the Apkallu and the Anunnaki, which we'll cover again in the civilian podcast. But the Apkallu and the Anunnaki are considered these great culture heroes in ancient Mesopotamia. They basically civilize mankind. And so, and you have this.
Is that where the DNA mixing and all that stuff comes to?
There's all of it. Pretty much everything is going to be on the table. So not only are they imparting divine knowledge, but they're doing the same thing that the sons of God and the daughters of men doing. So they're commingling the species, and then their offspring are 2/3 Apkallu, one. So you get all of these different hybrids, as to use a modern term, that come out of that. And so all of these stories are kind of like. Interconnected, right? And so
and then I'm saying DNA because again now it's compared to what's happening now, right? We see all this human hacking and all that stuff, DNA based, exactly, So it's the 21st century looking back and calling it DNA. Those people didn't know what DNA was,
right? They wouldn't call it that, right? They had a different language specifically, and so now you get this idea that after the flood they either mate with human women or they pass down their sacred knowledge by secrecy through symbology, and so if
that's against Cyvilan stuff, right? Yeah,
it is, right. So because this idea of the mystery religion is going to be birthed out of these ideas, you're going to get a divine right of kings to rule. And this event that takes place that confuses the language, well, if we all understand the symbols, then the symbols will be that universal language that can be passed down.
You keep the memory, right? What the symbol means. That's all you need. You don't need to know. Yeah.
Right. So the language becomes secondary then. So if somebody's going to confuse the languages, it's irrelevant because we have the symbol that represents the ideas themselves.
Well, they're like a virus, They're just trying to adapt as they go. Yeah.
So now we get Genesis 6:5, and God saw the wickedness of man that it was great on the earth, and every imagining of his thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously. So now, they've not only is there's this transgression of the heavens and the earth, but now the Watchers are teaching mankind
how to do it.
Yeah. Well, they're teaching them things that are going to help them more efficiently destroy themselves. And so, the Most High is looking down. And he's like, this is a problem. So,
as you say now, I'm just thinking of all this teachers at schools, when it comes to mixing of all genders and all that stuff too. Like you said, just teaching to speed up the the destruction,
destruction process. And so a part of being on Yahweh's team is upholding the original order that he put in place. And so that order, non-order, disorder, chaos theme is one of the major anchors in this entire story, because only Yahweh is the source of order. And clearly, to define yourself as being on his team, you might want to start doing the things that identify you with being on his team. Namely, as Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commands. 1 John says, you can't say that you know him if you don't keep his commands. You're a liar and the truth is not in you. And so, and there's this parable that Jesus gives, basically of a rich, wealthy man who owns a business goes away, and he leaves people in charge, and when he comes back, he expects them
with the money. Yeah.
And so, but let's get into this. Is 1 Enoch 15:3, where it says, in the Enochian story, this again would be Yahweh speaking, but we wouldn't hold Enoch to be canonical, right? So just put that there. But it's the idea that biblical writers, New Testament writers, Old Testament writers are very familiar with this material, and these themes that are in Enochian literature and other pseudepigraphal writings also end up in New Testament and Old Testament, and we don't really need to get into all that. This will just serve the purpose for what we're doing here. So 1 Enoch 15:3, it's Yahweh speaking here, where he says, why have you left the high, holy, and everlasting heaven, and lain with women, and defiled yourself with the daughters of men, and taken wives unto yourselves, and acted like the children of earth, and begotten giants as sons? Right? If we go down, and now the giants who have been begotten by from body and flesh will be called evil spirits on the earth, right? And so now this is this precursor idea for how you got the demons on the timeline,
the legion to
right? And so, and their dwelling places will be on the earth. Evil spirits proceed from their bodies because they are created from above. Their beginning and their first basis being from the holy watchers. They will be evil spirits on the earth and will be called evil spirits, right? So okay, so now we got like a list here. So far we have the Nachash, that's the guy that deceives or tries to deceive Eve. We have the fallen humanity, right? Adam kicked out of the garden. We have the fallen watchers, the guys of the sons of God and the daughters of men. We have demons, which are their disembodied offspring. And then lastly, what do we have? It says lately, but lastly, you have the fallen sons of God that are placed over the nations at Babel. These guys are known as the gods of the nations. So they've ruled the nations since Babel. They've inspired all the world's religions in rebellion to Yahweh. They solicit worship from their populations. They're honored through various religions they've inspired. They're venerated by images, rituals, festivals, and holidays. And so I think for now that about sums it up. For now, we can get into
stuff. Yeah.
And so we'll pick it up next time. When when did all this happen? When were the sons of God placed over the nations? And once they're placed over the nations, what happens? What goes wrong? Again, this is all the backstory for why they're going to create a new world order in partnering with this original divine rebel, the Nachash, in the first place. And so it's good to go through this stuff to understand why that there's the animosity there to begin with. But yeah, that's for the next podcast.
Yeah, so the idea is now they trying to prolong as much as they can before the judgment day comes in, right?
Yeah,
and they're going to use humans to do it.
Yeah. So in the next piece, we're going to get to Psalm 82, where they're actual, they get placed over the nations, they misadminister the nations, they're going to be judged, and their judgment is a death sentence. And so their death sentence is going to be tied later with the Nachash's death sentence, and now those guys are going to band together and try to figure out how to solve this Yahweh problem. That's basically how it goes. And so we'll pick that up on the other side of the podcast.
Yeah. Well, that being said, let us know if you like this format, because now we switched it up a little bit, trying to show a little bit more of the notes to make it easier to follow. Let us know if you like it, you don't like it, maybe just ditch all that, just have a regular conversation, you know. That being said, you can support us at the patreon.com/theiconic-podcast.
Yep.
You can find us in every major social media. We'll have the link tree in the description. It's who.be/iconic. And for some dope merchandise, you can go to the iconic. I almost said the Iconic Podcast, theIconicLabel.com. You can get hats, t-shirts, hoodies. Yeah. And then don't forget about the highlights channel on YouTube. We have the Iconic Highlights, where we'll chop up some of these maybe segments from this podcast, and then we'll just post them there too. If you don't have an hour or 50 minutes or 2 hours, sometimes it depends where it goes, you can go there and watch in bites.
Right. Yep. Thanks, guys. We appreciate it.